ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and Al-Nusra have all been created, trained, funded, and armed by Western nations like the USA, the UK, and France. Their associated agencies, such as the CIA, MI6, and Mossad, and their allies, such as Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Israel. That is where Western taxes go to. Just like the lies about non-existent weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, now the Western corporate-owned media directly promotes the West's own creation of ISIS to carry out unnecessary wars to further the agendas and profits of Western banks, corporations, and governments. NATO and Western governments are the chief murderers, not the Syrian people. Activists such as Kevin O'Keefe have been pointing this out for a long time. It's about time that we all started to listen. He has also pointed out that ISIS is a perfect acronym for Israeli Secret Intelligence Service, also known as Mossad. This makes sense because ISIS never attacks the Israeli government and it destabilizes all of its neighbors. Coincidence? I think not. President Putin of Russia has openly stated several times that the U.S.A. has armed ISIS, as well as the other moderate rebels fighting President Assad of Syria. Not only is this true, but the USA has also created the necessary political and informational climate to facilitate this situation. The USA understands perfectly well who is fighting who, yet they continue to push the sale of their arms and weapons into the area. At the G20 summit in 2015, Putin even went on to further say that 40 countries have been funding ISIS. The news agency Russia Today has shown that the US is creating in Syria a perpetual state of war, funding jihadists on one side and then attacking them on the other, while the civilian casualties are all just part of the game. Former British Foreign Secretary Robin Cook has even stated that, the truth is, there is no Islamic army or terrorist group called Al-Qaeda, and any informed intelligence officer knows this. But there is a propaganda campaign to make the public believe in the presence of an intensified entity representing the devil only in order to drive TV watchers to accept a unified international leadership for a war against terrorism. The country behind this propaganda is the United States of America. Captured ISIS militants have even stated that Western allies are friends of ISIS. The Egyptian state media has claimed that ISIS is made up. Now that we know that Western governments trained, funded, and armed ISIS, just like Al-Qaeda, let's look into how what we see in the Middle East today is just the successful replaying of aggressive Western foreign policy in the region. The CIA gave $4.6 billion to Al-Qaeda in the 1980s to fight proxy wars such as in Afghanistan against the U.S.A. The situation in the Middle East now is nothing but proxy wars that profit the military-industrial complex within Western nations. Endless sources document this. How is ISIS any different to Al-Qaeda? Osama bin Laden was a CIA asset and knew the USA heads of state very well. Heads of ISIS such as Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, who Edward Snowden exposed as the Jewish actor and Mossad agent Simon Elliott, have met with US heads of state, such as Senator John McCain, regularly. This is not a coincidence. We could go back even further because most of the problems in the Middle East today can all be traced back to colonialist and Western interference, such as the overthrow of the democratically elected Mossadegh of Iran in 1953. If you don't believe me, then please read the book Confessions of an Economic Hitman by John Perkins. It accurately details how the CIA conspired to overthrow and destroy the democratic and socialist Iranian government because they wanted to nationalize all oil assets and kick out all of the Western corporations, sucking the life and wealth out of their country. They wanted to empower their people, and they were destroyed by shadow government agencies of the Western world, such as the CIA and President Franklin Roosevelt's grandson. More evidence that Western governments are creating all of these terror problems in the Middle East is evident when you look at the behavior of their allies. The Turkish government is cooperating with ISIS. Turkey has been funding and arming ISIS militants as well as letting them pass freely through their country into Syria. NATO nations making deals with organizations such as ISIS is completely normal, apparently. The Saudi Arabian dictatorial kingdom provides ISIS with weapons and even BlackBerry cell phones. I wonder what else the Saudi regime is providing ISIS with. The UK newspaper The Independent went on to say that the US's allies Saudi Arabia and Qatar are funding ISIS. The people of the world do not want this, yet it continues to happen. Why? This goes to show that governments don't represent the people. They only serve corporations. This is evident from how over 90% of the British population opposed the war with Iraq in 2003, and over 80% of the British population opposed the bombing of Syria in 2015. Mainstream media consistently provides distractions and disinformation about false flag attacks at home to provide cover for aggressive military operations in the Middle East. This is nothing new. Each war is preceded by a big media lie. Just like an ISIS flag was found moments after the Paris bombings in November, Western governments have conveniently linked this event to their plan of oppression in the Middle East. Doesn't that seem very suspicious to you? That's a gigantic red flag if you ask me. If these ISIS terrorists were genuinely fighting an undercover war of terror against the democratic Western world, then wouldn't they be a little more discreet? Apparently questioning the official story and thinking for yourself is a crime. Many activists, genuine journalists, and ordinary citizens have been deemed radicals and potential terror threats for speaking out against the oppressive actions of our corrupt Western governments. Now that we know that this is a war of terror funded by Western governments, let's end with a quote from a Syrian person who has lived through this horror and who is speaking out against Western governments. I am a Syrian living in Syria. It was never a revolution nor a civil war. The terrorists are sent by your government.